Good, we're good.
All right, thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. It is 6:31, and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School District, Monomoy Regional School Committee. This is our community forum being held on Thursday, March 4th. And I want to first open up the forum by calling to order our school committee, because this is an official school committee gathering. And I'm going to make my way around the Zoom room. When I say your name, if you could just state your full name and present. Terry, we will start with you.
Good evening, Terry Russell, present.
Thank you. Joanne.
Joanne Sheehan, present.
Thank you. Joe.
Joseph Osceola, present.
Thank you. Nancy.
Nancy Scott, present.
Thank you. Sharon.
Sharon Stout, present.
Thank you. Meredith.
Meredith Henderson, present.
And Jackie. I don't think Jackie is with us tonight. And Tina Games, present. So before we move into the brief presentation on the current status of our elementary schools, I just wanted to kind of set the stage for everybody this evening. We're going to start with the brief presentation that will kind of give you a little bit of a synopsis as to why we're here this evening in this community forum. After the presentation, we will be opening it for public comment. And if I could ask everyone except myself and the presenters that will follow me, if you could just put yourself on mute, because we are recording this, and in order to get a clean recording, if everyone could mute. When we do get to the public comment period, in order to speak, and we are, just to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak tonight, I am going to limit public comments to 3 minutes. Additional time will be given at the discretion of the chair, myself, and you can speak a second time after everyone in the queue has gone. You are also in public comment welcome to ask clarifying questions. If there is a question that you would like an answer to, or just some clarification, you can ask me and I will route that to the appropriate person. So again, if everybody could mute themselves before we begin. Also at the bottom of your screen, I see your hand, Leah. At the bottom of your screen, everyone, when we do get to public comment, if you want to just take a minute to take a look at the bottom, you will see either a raise hand option or there is a smiley face that says reactions. If you hit the reactions, you'll see where the raise hand option is. If for whatever reason you're not able to speak this evening or ask your question, if you're at a place where maybe you can't do that, there is a chat box at the bottom of the screen, and you are welcome to type your question or a brief comment, and I will be happy to read that. So we want to make that option available for those of you that for whatever reason might not be able to speak. So with that, we're going to move into the presentation. It's a brief presentation on current status of our elementary schools, and I will now turn that over to Superintendent Scott Carpenter.
Thanks, Tina. So I just put together a few slides to cover some of the, I guess, things that we have been talking about at the school committee level, and that we've had conversations about at the elementary school level. So I'll just share my screen here. So really the purpose of tonight and the discussion is to look at how we can provide an ideal learning environment for all of Monomoy's elementary school students. And I want to emphasize that this isn't about closing one school down or the other. It's really about how our regional agreement reads and whether or not we should look at amending how the regional agreement is reading in order to provide better services for our students. So So there's a section of the regional agreement that that says there shall be no less than one elementary school in each member town, and that the students in those shall in the towns, shall attend those schools. So, so Harwich children go to Harwich Elementary School, Chatham children go to Chatham Elementary School, and there's a little exception there for special cases, and that that could be a situation where you have an intensive needs special education program that's located at one building that might serve students who who could get bused over to to have their specific needs met in one building, and other students get bused to the other building to have their needs met, depending on how the programs are set up. Just to give some of the history that I think really brings us to this place, what we're really seeing here is an enrollment challenge, and it's an enrollment challenge that is happening across the state of Massachusetts. It's happening on Cape Cod much more than the state of Massachusetts, but the state of Massachusetts has seen a loss over the last 2 decades of nearly 70-some thousand students. But there are actually areas in Massachusetts that are seeing increases in students, in the sort of urban suburban areas. But the Berkshires and on Cape Cod, we're seeing a continuing decline in the number of students over the past 2 decades. And within Cape Cod, we're seeing some towns losing students at a much faster rate than other towns, and we've been seeing that really in the last decade here, with Harwich losing students, but Chatham losing students at a much faster rate. So if we go back to the last year that the school district was, or that the towns were operating their schools completely separate of each other, in FY11, Chatham Elementary had 279 students in it, so just shy of 300. Harwich Elementary was just shy of 600 students with 579 students. Chatham Elementary was heavily propped up by school choice, as was all of Chatham Public Schools. So 30% of the students that were attending Chatham Public Schools as the district was coming together came from other towns, with a disproportionate number of those students coming from Harwich. So the majority of the students that came to Chatham Elementary through school choice came from Harwich. So 16% of Chatham Elementary's population were Harwich students. Harwich had a lot of school choice students, but a much lower percentage than Harwich in the elementary school and overall system. And only a few of those students were Chatham Elementary or were Chatham residents. If we fast forward to the current time, and I put up here, the big numbers are last year's enrollment data, because COVID has kind of created a situation where it's hard to kind of pin down what the real enrollments would look like, since a number of families actually have opted for homeschooling as opposed to distance learning. So there's enrollment down at the elementary level in particular because of that. So if we look at Chatham Elementary last year pre-COVID, its enrollment had dropped 26% to 204 students. Harwich Elementary had dropped 5% to 552 students. But Chatham, again, was still a significant number. Almost a quarter of those students were school choice students, and the majority of those school choice students were coming from Harwich. Harwich Elementary, again, just over 10% of the students were school choice students, and only, again, a small number of those students were from Chatham. So we do see some inter-district school choice going each direction in our 2 towns, and we allow that if there's room available. So the school choice process in the district is if we have free seats in a classroom. So we try to staff our classrooms to have a teacher in the room And we try to not go over 18 students in that classroom if we can avoid it. So if we have 14 students in the room from the member towns or to have previously come in through school choice, we will take in up to 4 students into that classroom. And if we have more applicants than we have seats, it would go down to it would go down to a lottery for those. There's sort of a siblings get get the first seats. Then it looks like the discussion that's been happening at the school committee is that we would have the resident students in the other town would have the second sort of selection of those seats, and any remaining would be a pure lottery. At the moment for kindergarten next year, we have 5 applicants for school choice at Chatham Elementary for kindergarten. 3 of those 5 have placed or have specified that they would like to have Harwich Elementary first if they get into Harwich Elementary. But if they don't get into Harwich Elementary, Chatham Elementary. At Harwich Elementary, we have 8 applicants for kindergarten school choice. We tend to see more applicants for Harwich Elementary's school choice slots, and it's purely a matter of geography. If we just keep in mind that Chatham is completely wrapped around by either Ocean or Harwich, and the majority of those that are applying for school choice are coming from the Dennis, Yarmouth, and Brewster areas, which are geographically closer to Harwich. So so the families oftentimes opt for Harwich Elementary, and then we'll reach out to them and say, would you be interested in Chatham Elementary if Harwich isn't available? We do get funding for school choice students when they come in. We get $5,000 per pupil. Again, it is not a money-making proposition. So if we take in 4 school choice students in a classroom of 14, we're seeing $20,000 of revenues that we can support the education. If we were to take in, let's say 20 school choice students, we'd have to add a teacher, and the amount of money that we would actually be taking in for school choice wouldn't support the additional costs that we would have to have. So we'd have to have the taxpayers funding us taking in more school choice students, and it does get to be a financial burden on the taxpayers if we were to go with that sort of strategy. I want to emphasize that school choice is not something that's going to help any school district on the Cape mitigate what's happening in terms of enrollment. Back, I think it was 2007, a demographer, Peter Francese, was hired and did a study of the schools on the Cape, and was just foreshadowing that the demographics of the Cape are going, that all the towns are going to see a progressive loss of young families and school children over the upcoming years. He came back again this just about a year ago and was updating that study. But this is a trend that's happening everywhere. And at the moment, we're in a situation in the schools on Cape, or school districts on Cape Cod, where we're really stealing each other's students, and we're stealing a increasingly dwindling pool. So even today, there are fewer children to attract to the district than there were 10 years ago, and there are fewer children 10 years ago than there were 20 years back. Just to give a quick overview, just on the finances behind elementary schools. As schools get smaller and smaller and smaller, they do become more expensive to run, and it's just sort of a economics principle, the economies of scale. So if you look out far out on Cape Cod, the smaller school districts, Provincetown, Truro, and Wellfleet are all looking at per pupil expenditures, in the $30,000 range, and they have very small elementary schools, very small class sizes in them. So we are likely to see in our elementary schools, as they contract, the per pupil expenditures going upwards. One of the conversations, and it's a parallel conversation, not one necessarily for tonight, but I've been raising sort of a concern that Chatham Elementary Schools per pupil expenditure is starting to go up at a much higher rate relative to Harwich's. And there's a parallel conversation that's going on with the school committee and the boards of selectmen on how we can provide some financial equity in how the elementary schools are funded, because our regional agreement really is one that's based on a statutory method set out by Massachusetts general law. And it's blind to what's happening on the dynamics at the elementary level. So the big conversations, these next two slides are really, I think, what has been driving things we've been talking about at the elementary level. The first is just this notion of, can elementary classrooms be too large or be too small? And when we first came together as a district, Harwich Public Schools had classrooms that were largely around 20 or more students in them. And I was sort of scratching my head when I first got here, because Chatham Elementary School had these very, very small classrooms, arguably maybe even too small, that you'd want to see a few more students, that they were 11 student classrooms of 11, 14 students in a classroom. And Harwich Elementary would have some classrooms that are in the low 20s up to 23. And I looked at it that one of our priorities coming together as a school district is to make sure that our smallest class sizes in the district should be with our younger students. So we put a kibosh on taking in so many students at Harwich Elementary School. I think there was a strategy prior to us coming together as a district in Harwich. They took in so many students at the kindergarten, first grade, second grade level, and had these really large class sizes, anticipating that they would lose students through school choice as they got older, and that you'd be left with enough kids to have a viable high school at the end. But by coming together with Chatham, we didn't need to go and have that strategy. Chatham Public Schools, on the other hand, had these very small classes, and we were trying to use school choice to go and equalize the two schools to have classrooms that were roughly around 18 students. There's a lot of literature out there on the benefits educationally of decreasing class size from the 20s to a number closer to 18. There's not a lot of literature out there on the benefits of or on the challenges of having a classroom that's too small, but at least anecdotally, classrooms that, as they get smaller and smaller and smaller, your ability to have vibrant classroom discussions, your ability to have sort of the personal dynamics not take over. You could have a child with a strong personality in the room that starts to take over if you have a smaller grouping. And then for our students that are in our minority populations, the smaller you have a classroom, the less likely that you're going to have somebody who is like you, that you and then just in terms of being like you, you may have just children in general not find peers within a classroom that's too small, the peer that has similar interests, so, and at the end of the day, the ability to find individuals in that classroom who you connect with has a lot of trade-off on the other end on how much that child wants to be in school and how invested they are in their education. In terms of school size, there's been some research done on what's sort of the optimal size for an elementary school. And again, when I came here, Harwich Elementary was the biggest pure elementary school on Cape Cod, and with an enrollment in the upper 500s, and arguably Harwich Elementary was too large of an elementary school. And Chatham Elementary, when I first got here, at 3 classrooms per grade level, in my opinion, it was it's sort of like the three, the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Harwich Elementary School at 3 classrooms per grade level, I'd argue, was just right. Yeah, and the concern was, as Chatham Elementary lost enrollment and shifted from 3 classrooms per grade level to 2, and now at some grade levels 1 classroom per grade level, is it becoming too small of an elementary school? So you have challenges with elementary schools when they get too large. You lose that interpersonal connectedness. I know I can speak for myself as a former principal of a high school with over 1,800 students in it. I wanted to know the name of every one of those students. I've been envious of our principal having 600 students at a high school. I think gives you that ability to really connect and know those 600 kids. 1,800, at the high school level was starting to get too big, and I think that those connections, are even that much more important at the elementary level. And so big sometimes, can lead to a lack of connection. But having multiple classrooms, I think, is really important for our teachers. They provides them opportunities to share curricular resources and ideas with each other, and to help each other in their practice. Multiple classrooms with students gives them opportunities to connect with other peers. When they go out at recess, you'll have the kids that like doing certain things can go gather together. So you do have increased opportunities to sort of make those connections. And I as a parent, I do worry about if I had a child and there was only 1 classroom at a grade level, what would it look like for my kid over the next 5 years if there was somebody in that classroom who they just didn't gel with. And I know that over the years with my own children, there have been times where you reach out to the school saying, well, next year, hopefully my child's not in a classroom with this, this person or that person. And I also know that, that when we first came here, and, my kids were in the Chatham school system, I know that my son was, he found in that classroom of, I think it was 11 at 5th grade at Chatham Middle School, he found, I think, a lifelong friend in that 11, and I think that's great. But I worry, had that one boy not been in that classroom, what that year would have looked like for my son, and what subsequent years would have looked like for him. So I think, again, having more kids is important too, and just having more opportunities to go and make those connections. So really, what the conversation has been coming down to, if Harwich Elementary is arguably too large and Chatham Elementary is arguably becoming too small, how should we fix this? And I emphasize the term "we" because this is not something the superintendent can fix, and this isn't something that the school committee can fix. At the end of the day, that Section 5 in the regional agreement says that, says how our elementary schools should be structured. So if we want to go and address this as a regional school district, we have to go and get buy-in from our parents and our constituencies, because it would have to get addressed at a town meeting if we're going to structure the regional agreement under Section 5 in some different way. So I know that there are folks with the Chatham 365 that did a similar survey, but we had reached out a few years ago to survey parents, and then reached out to survey parents again, and provided them some choices to at least get a feeling for where are our parents now in terms of their thinking. And the Chatham parents, when we surveyed 3 years ago, very clearly came back and said that they really wanted to see the status quo persist, so to not change anything. And what we've seen in the last 3 years as Chatham Elementary School's gotten smaller, they've been more open to seeing some students from Harwich come by changing a change in the regional agreement through a redistricting to Chatham Elementary School. That's that redistrict. And on the other hand, they were clear in the survey that we put out, because we did have one option that if we look out there into the future as our enrollments in both towns continue to contract, that would we want to see them under one roof, and the only school that would fit everybody under one roof looking off into the future would be at Harwich Elementary School. And the Chatham parents were really clear that was something they wouldn't want to see. And then if we look at the Harwich parents and how they responded exactly opposite, that they didn't want to see any sort of redistricting. They didn't want to see a section of Harwich just being told to go to Chatham. They would be amenable to having everybody under one roof. And then when we asked our staff, over half of them said, hey, it would be best to go and see upper and lower elementary schools where all of the staff and all of the children of the same grade level are together. And there's some benefits of that, but there are also some challenges when it comes to upper and lower elementary schools, and happy to go and address those later. But there's also a myriad of other things that we could look at in terms of how you might restructure, or how you might do things differently in your elementary schools, both in Harwich and in Chatham, because there are vacant classrooms right now, and we know, given the enrollment trends, there will continue to be vacant trends. And do we want to look into the future and look at something like universal pre-K, or use those classrooms for preschool, for preschool programming? So there are other things that we could look at, but we'll just kind of stop there. And I just left this off as sort of food for thought. And I think the conversation really comes down to, is Harwich too large? Or Harwich Elementary too large? Chatham too small? And if so, what ultimately should we do to fix this? So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate that. Before we move into public comment, I just want to make a couple of announcements here. Jackie Zebret Long, who's one of our school committee members, has joined us. So the school committee is in full quorum this evening. I also want to acknowledge, joining us tonight, we have both of our elementary principals. We have Robin Millen from Chatham Elementary School with us, also Mary Oldak from Harwich Elementary School with us, and we also have Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. So we're going to move into public comment, and again, if you could keep your mics muted unless I call on you. If you would like to speak, we have a couple of options here. You can go to the bottom of your screen, and there should be a reactions button at the bottom. And if you click on that, right above it says raise hand. And if you cannot find that, just kind of wave your hand and I will call on you. And during the public comment, because we do have a nice full room this evening, we want to make sure we give everyone an opportunity who wants to speak to do so tonight. So I am going to limit you to 3 minutes, but I'm happy to give a little bit of extra time to finish your statements. You're also welcome to ask clarifying questions. If you need some clarification on anything the superintendent has shared this evening, we're happy to answer that for you. So with that said, also when I do call on you, if you will say your name and give us your address, we are required to just kind of record that. And Leah, I see your hand. It looks like you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do already have a question in the chat from Gretchen. I don't know if you'd like to start with her. This is the first question. I can read it or she can speak it.
Yes, that would be great. Gretchen, would you like to ask your question or would you like us to
Of
read
course.
it? Okay, go
No,
ahead.
I can read it. I'm Gretchen Kolb-Cobble. I own the Rocking Unicorn Nursery School in Chatham. I'm also a Chatham resident. I also went to the Chatham school system, so I'm all about Chatham. I see that CES is now accepting choice students for kindergarten. I know that families in the past several years wanted a choice to CE at Chatham Elementary for kindergarten, but it wasn't permitted. Can you explain why it wasn't in the past and now it is?
All right, thank you, Gretchen. And Scott, would you like to take that, or Dr. Millen?
Sure. At the end of the day, it's all what we try to do is balance class size with school choice. So if we have free seats, we'll go open it up. If we don't have free seats at that grade level, we can't. We'll have and it's one of those things that if we were able to go and get let's say there are 2 free seats available for kindergarten at Chatham Elementary School. If we had 20 Harwich children that wanted to come to Chatham Elementary School, we would be able to go take the 2 to fill up to 18. Plus, we could go move a teacher from Harwich Elementary School to Chatham Elementary School. But we have to be cognizant of at the end of the day, we've got staff that we have to at least be using and making sure that we're either diverting the families that have applied for school choice to where we have the free seats.
Okay, thank you. And I see a hand raised. Hold on one second. It looks like it's one of our school committee members, Nancy Scott. Yes.
Scott, could you just clarify what you mean by free seats for people who may not follow completely?
So we could do this in a real scenario. So I'll ask Robin to go play here. So Robin, what do you anticipate the number of kindergarten Chatham resident seats to be for next year, given what you see in the tea leaves? And I know kindergarten registration has already begun.
So kindergarten registration happened over the last couple of days, but prior to kindergarten registration, we go through a process of kind of shaking out the bushes to see who's out there. And this year, probably more so than most, because of the fact that a lot of families are at home and students are not in preschool or some of the other daycare providers that we normally contact to see who's a Chatham resident, who's a Harwich resident. We also take the census and we try to track down the children who were born in Chatham over 5 years ago and things like that. So based off all that, we have a list of about 26 students that we think are in the tea leaves out there somewhere. However, we did do registration over the last 2 days and we have 19 children registered for kindergarten that are Chatham residents. So right now we're above the board policies that we're anticipating coming in, which is 17 plus or minus 1. So we will need to make some decisions as between Dr. Carpenter, myself, Principal Aldak, and some of the other things as to what do we do for that classroom size. So if we stay with 19, we won't have any school choice seats available this year. However, if we take the 5 that Dr. Carpenter just spoke about that are school choice seats, then that opens up a possibility of potentially having 10, 12 seats available for school choice this year. So it really depends because we're right on that cusp of the board policy of 17 plus or minus 1.
And we'll have to go look at what happens with the Harwich Elementary kindergarten enrollment, because as Robin says, she's looking at the tea leaves, and the tea leaves are sort of an awkward number where where 26 if it does become 26 students materialize, that's too much for one kindergarten class. You want to have 2, but 2 classes of 13 is probably too small. So so I anticipate that we are going to probably be driving all 5 of those school choice applications, even though 3, one at Harwich Elementary School, and pushing them towards Chatham Elementary School to try to fill those classrooms, and likely limiting school choice at kindergarten at Harwich Elementary School to balance out the class sizes. Because if we were to bring those in, it's entirely possible that the remaining school choice ones would start to elevate those classrooms, and you've got children at one elementary school in classrooms of 18, and children at the other elementary school in classrooms of 15, and we want to try to get the two as close as we can together.
Okay, thank you for that. And I see Gretchen's hand up, so go ahead. You have a follow-up question?
Just wondered if there's been any consideration of doing a mixed age group of a K1, if you had half of a classroom and doing something of that nature, transitional kindergarten for kids who, slightly missed the cutoff, or anything a little bit different to work with your numbers that might supplement the elementary school.
Yes,
Dr.
Gretchen.
Miller?
Yes, thank you. So yes, we have had that conversation in my tenure here. One most recently was last year. So last year when we had approximately about 12 people or 12 children of Chatham residents on the docket at this time of the year, we started contemplating what we would do if we only had one section of kindergarten. So I began to run some information through the school council. I began to run some information through focus groups. I ran a bunch of series of events with parents, both parents of current kindergartners that were here in school, because they would be affected if we did a K1 classroom, and also focus groups with incoming kindergartners who are now kindergartners this year. And overwhelmingly, the feedback and the information coming to me is that Chatham kindergarten families, incoming kindergarten families here this year, partly because of COVID, partly because of the disruption that was happening, partly because the children also had been separated from their preschool, as you know, Gretchen, preschool programs in March of last year. They wanted their children very much contained in a kindergarten classroom. When you start doing multi-age, as you know, we end up with even larger kind of outliers of abilities, skills, of social emotional developments, all of those things. So I came to the conclusion, I made the decision, I want to say probably about June last year, that we would remain with one classroom of kindergarten and have the 2 classrooms of first grade rather than integrating the 3 classrooms. But it did sound resoundingly as though the families at Chatham would prefer that rather than having integrated grade levels, but I'm open to having a discussion again if that's what the families decide.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Millen. I know that we've got, I believe, a couple of questions in the chat. Leah, would you kindly read? You can take one and then the next one.
Actually, from what I can see in the chat, I only see the 2 that Gretchen had posted that she's since read.
Okay, all right, so we're good there. Okay, thank you. Anybody else with a question or a clarifying comment? And again, just as a reminder, you can raise, I do see some hands. Wonderful. Jessica Rogers, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jessica Rogers. I'm from Chatham. I'm a parent of Chatham Elementary School students. I just wanted to talk about class size. I went to Chatham Elementary School, middle school, and graduated from high school. And I felt that the small class size, because Chatham's always been a really small school, was beneficial for me. I felt more of a connection to the administrators, to my teachers, to my peers. And currently I have 3 elementary school age children who have also really benefited from the small classrooms. And so in addition to that sort of anecdotal scenario, I was looking up the benefits of small classes, and I came across Project STAR, which was conducted in Tennessee in the 1980s, which went over the student-teacher achievement ratio, which showed that smaller classroom sizes not only, I took notes. If smaller classes were in grades K through 3, it improved the odds of graduating high school by 80%. It increased the likelihood of attending college, and that overall there was a positive impact on student achievement. That's it.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I
Sure.
appreciate that. Does anyone have a response or anything? Scott, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, Jessica, that's in the slide deck that I was sharing. I actually had Project Star on the slide on class sizes and being too large and too small, because that was the seminal piece of research that that I used to sort of inform my thinking on how to address Harwich Elementary School as the district was first coming together, because it was clear. It was clear looking at just how many kids were in kindergarten, first grade, second grade in Harwich Elementary School classrooms relative to what I was seeing happen over at Chatham Elementary School, that we sort of started to throttle back how many school choice kids we were bringing into the district, because there was a huge number that were coming in over at Harwich Elementary School, making those classrooms a lot larger than I think was educationally sound, and trying to go and bring this number down. And that's why our first budget that I did for the district, we sort of established we're going to budget for and fund our elementary schools to have small class sizes, and have done so ever since.
Thank you, Superintendent. I see the next hand, Jean or Jeannie Allen. You can go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it's Jeannie. Thanks, Tina. Good to meet you. I am a part-time resident, not just summer, so don't get mad at me, but I'm a part-time resident here. And my day job is actually running the Center for Education Reform based in Washington, D.C. And I've just been a huge fan of watching your school systems over the years. I don't have kids here. I didn't raise kids here. I have a son who hopefully will sometime be here with his kids. But I just give that to you as context. And I know a lot of the parents who I've gotten to know here over time who have shared with me their concerns. And I mean, you are doing an enormously difficult job trying to straddle a really difficult issue that, as you all know, thousands of districts and communities across the country go through. And I just want to come at this from a slightly different slice to maybe encourage some additional out of the box thinking. I know, Scott, you've been doing a lot of it sounds like, and I've looked at some of your reports. But even though you're not saying you're going to take away the elementary school now, I've looked at the Massachusetts and other enrollment trends over the years. I mean, we've had declines, we've had peaks, and sometimes the evidence shows that when you have like these declines and you make changes to school composition or even facilities, there'll be a time then we're coming up again, and you'll wonder why you don't have those communities. And a lot of the efforts that you're talking about that might mitigate cost savings or result in better composition in some ways, oftentimes don't. There's actually direct correlation about losing community where students actually have their neighborhood school, and an increase in cost of social services that tie back to student well-being. And so academic achievement is affected when students don't feel like they're part of a community, when it's harder for their parents to get to them. And so when you want to mitigate budget losses, which is really smart, I think you might want to look, if you haven't yet, and I'm happy to volunteer any thoughts that I can give you or that I know of. And I know you've been in touch probably with School Boards Association, AASA, and all of them, but there's so many organizations out there that are actually thinking differently about what can we do to actually, somebody mentioned multi-groups, maybe bringing together different ways to use the facility all the time, even more than we do now. There's even crowded ones talking about it. But in a day and age when our kids right now are so challenged even by COVID, even the buzz created, I've heard from some of the parents in the community, is fearful, right? And it causes some of that. And I know you guys are really thinking about that. So I would just encourage you that maybe there's even other things outside, and you guys have so much going on. I can't even imagine how you've done a lot of that you've done. So I honor you with what you've done. But there might be a lot of different ways to look at this. And community schools, you guys are so lucky to have what you have. And we've seen so many people who've had schools that suddenly were not in their backyard, and it resulted in a bigger decline not an increase and a larger cost in the long run. So I would just encourage you to think through those things too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. I appreciate your comment. Next, we have a hand up. It looks like from a school committee member, Jackie Zebrat Long. Jackie, go ahead.
Just trying to get myself organized there. Actually, I wanted to go back to the small class size, and I was hoping that Dr. Carpenter could comment on the district's kind of responsibility towards the equitable classroom sizes that we do maintain at this time, what those numbers are, and kind of looking out at what we are projecting to what those class sizes would be. Because when we speak about small class sizes, I think it's important to throw some numbers out of actually what we are dealing with versus other school systems across the state and even across the country, just kind of understanding where our class sizes fit in that picture at this time.
Jackie. Scott, do you want to have a response to that?
Sure. So, so what we budget for is to have our elementary schools average no more than 18 plus or minus one child in classrooms. And the way it plays out in reality is oftentimes it's a little bit less than that. Again, it's are there choice kids that are coming over and filling those those vacant seats that would bring the classroom up to 18, and and it is different. It's rather, as an educator, I think anybody who has been in elementary schools and experienced them outside of our own community or even off Cape Cod, having 18 in the classroom is rather surreal. I know, when we came here from Sudbury, and Sudbury had great schools, but my children, were in classrooms that were always 24, 25 kids. And, when we came here, the ability of my daughter to be in a classroom that had, less than 18 kids in it, and to get the attention that she got, I think really helped her flourish and thrive. And I think she was always very connected to her teachers because she was getting so much more attention than when the classroom was literally almost twice as large in the suburbs. So so again, it's been a very conscious decision that we've made at the administration level, and I've been very grateful to have a school committee and select boards and finance committees that have supported our budgets to maintain the class sizes that we've had.
Thank you, Scott. The next question I'm going to take from Megan Story. Megan, go ahead.
Sorry, I did not shower and change before the meeting, so you won't be seeing my face. But I just want to say thank you to Jeannie. I've never met you. I am also a Chatham resident. Apologies for not mentioning that. I live in South Chatham. I have a child who's in the middle school currently. So I did experience Chatham Elementary, and I have to say that everything I experienced there was positive. And I strongly agree with what Jeannie was saying with regard to community. I think that what is at stake if we lose an elementary school in any town is not just the long-term effects like she was mentioning for kids, but I think also for the community as a whole. So I just want to keep that in mind. But also with regard to small classrooms, I personally believe that in Chatham, we've been able to use those small classrooms to give children of many academic levels and many needs services that they may not necessarily get if those classrooms were not at that small size. Not everyone qualifies for an IEP, but lots of people have needs that need to be taken care of. And I think that the teachers have been able to do that with those small classroom sizes. So I would love to see them be able to stay that way. But in addition, thank you, Jeannie, for your comments, because I really do firmly agree with you.
Thank you, Megan, for your comment. The next question or comment will come from Lindsay Berwith. Lindsay, go ahead.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for holding this forum. I also, like Megan, went to Chatham Elementary School and have an elementary school kid right here. And I also, along with others, believe strongly that we need an elementary school in our town, and it's the fabric of our community. And as a part of the Chatham 365, advocating for those young families to be a part of our community, we really do need Chatham Elementary School. My question is, about 3 or 4 years ago at a Board of Selectmen meeting, the Board of Selectmen had asked Scott to reveal the numbers of school choice children requests coming in. So this would have been for the class of 2028, 2029, 2030. Harriet's 2031. She's currently a second grader. So back when they were coming from pre-K into kindergarten, or from before pre-K into the integrated program, what were those numbers of school choice children? Because at the time when we were leaving the Rocking Unicorn coming into Chatham Elementary School, we certainly had a long list of Harwich families and Harwich friends who wanted to be a part of our elementary school, but were told no. So I would love to see if there's any, where the numbers are and where the school choice numbers are. Because when my children started at Chatham Elementary School, there were 3 kindergartens, 3 first grades, 3 second grades, 3 third grades, 3 fourth grades. And now we're down to, it's hard to judge right now. We're a remote family, there's homeschool families. But I strongly believe that there were a lot of inter-district school choice families that wanted to come to Chatham and were told no. So I just want to know if there's any public access to those numbers of school choice families. Applicants and acceptance, because the numbers that we're seeing are a little bit skewed because they're grandfathered in. Whereas, Tim Woods had written an article about our friend, that wanted to come from the Rocking Unicorn into kindergarten. So anyway, my question, the long and short of it is, I'd love to see those school choice numbers for the current 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st kindergarten, so we can see for ourselves the demand drop. Because I think once we stopped inter-district school choice, then, clearly the numbers are going to go down. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to clarify, we haven't stopped inter-district school choice. So the biggest grouping of kids of school choice children at Chatham Elementary School come from Harwich. So that's our predominant choice in. It's just that we have to look at how many. So if we have 8 families from Harwich that want to come to Chatham Elementary School, and we only have 4 more seats left to go bring that grouping up, we aren't going to take all 8 of those. We're going to only take part of them. We would need those 8 coming plus another classroom, or those 4 plus another classroom's worth of Harwich students for us to pull a teacher out of Harwich, to pull a kindergarten teacher out of Harwich and bring that over to Chatham. But my assistant Leah goes and tracks. She tracks all of the school choice applicants that we have each year, and so we report out every year. There's a school attending children report that has how many students are from what towns at what grade levels that we put out publicly.
Thank you. Dr. Millen, did you have anything to add?
I don't have the exact numbers. It's one of those things that it's exactly what Dr. Carpenter is saying. So as soon as we have the seats filled, as far as the Chatham residents go, we look at those numbers. And again, Ms. Tambolio has the applications, dated, timed. I mean, we literally put times on them, because after we seat the residents, and then we take the school choice who are historical or legacy school choice, we fill those seats. And then from there, we take whoever came in first in the lottery, right? And then we go that way. So if recently, and I know there was a lot of confusing. A couple of years ago, we did a really what I call like almost like a dog and pony show where I was over at Harwich. We were really Mary Aldeck was very gracious about every registration that came in. We asked the families over at Harwich if they were interested at all in coming to Chatham. I ran tours. I did forums again and all of those things. And in the end, we had a handful, and I can't give you the exact number because off the top of my head, I don't know. We had a handful of families willing to come from Harwich over to Chatham. So we filled the seats with what we had left, but it wasn't enough to go and open another classroom, as Dr. Carpenter is saying. We had just only a small handful left, 4 or 5 of them, I believe, maybe not even that. And you can't open a classroom or pull a student or a teacher from Harwich over to Chatham for 4 or 5 students. So ultimately, some families from Harwich who we had tried to get over here and offer, some incentive to do so, we had to say no to. And I know that was not an easy thing to do, but we just didn't have enough to open that second class or third classroom at the time.
Thank you, Dr. So I'm going to, oh, sorry, I don't know. I think we've got a bit of an echo there. I'm going to move to the next person with a hand raised. Dean Castro, go ahead.
Thank you, Tina. Dean Castro from the Chatham Select Board. I just really wanted to bring something up that I mentioned at the recent joint meeting with the 2 select boards and the school committee. And by the way, I want to thank the school committee for conducting this forum this evening. And that really is something that went to the issue of possibly redistricting the elementary schools. The survey that Scott mentioned earlier and was brought up several times, I don't think contained the geographic distribution of the parents' responses within the town of Harwich. I think it would be helpful for us in Chatham, because we're going to be conducting our own forum on the Chatham Elementary School coming up, to know whether those Harwich parents who live closer to the Chatham line might feel differently about redistricting portions of Harwich into the Chatham Elementary School. So I don't know if that data is available within the survey that you already have, survey results that you already have, or whether that information is something that would have to be obtained in the future. But I just think it's I think it would be a very helpful and useful data set for everyone to know. And that's all. It's just a comment. I don't expect an answer tonight, but I really wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Scott, it looks like your mic is off. Go ahead.
So, Dean, I think if I'm correct, and I think Joy's on here, she could tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that we have an email, and we might be able to go in and figure out where was the family an East Harwich family, or were they closer to Harwich Center. So I think we might be able to do that. I don't know. I don't know how useful it would be, in that I think if we were very specific in surveying, because I think people will respond differently if it and their awareness, their spidey sense goes up if you actually say it's this specific neighborhood, and they know it's going to impact me or not impact me. I think when you say redistrict and it's a portion of Harwich, I think parents may respond thinking, well, that could be me, so I and are responding thinking that it might be them, as opposed to just saying it's these specific streets or these specific neighborhoods within within Harwich. I mean, the reality is, I think I do agree with Ms. Allen's assessment on community. I think community is important, and I think the interesting aspect of all of this is East Harwich in many ways is much closer to Chatham than it is to Harwich Elementary School, and I think at times Wauquasit thinks it's Chatham, even though it's Harwich, and it's the whole geography of where of where we are, and I think we have this interesting dynamic where it's not called like Monomoy East and Monomoy West. It's Chatham Elementary School, and I think there are families that live in East Harwich and say, okay, we're Harwich, not Chatham, and so I think they might respond very differently to a redistricting. I actually would anticipate that Harwich families would respond very differently if we were very specific and said, these are the neighborhoods that you're talking about. And again, knowing full well, having lived in Sudbury, where they had a number of new housing developments pop up, and every few years the elementary schools would get redistricted, and it was one of those things that it either impacted you as a family or it didn't, and how you would respond on how you felt about the superintendent's redistricting plan was going to be very different depending on what your address was as a parent.
Thank you, Scott. Before I move back into the queue, I want to ask a clarifying question on this, if I may. So assuming hypothetically, if we have people on the line in Harwich that say redistrict into Chatham, I believe that's still the responsibility financially of Harwich. Is that correct? Scott?
So technically, the way our regional agreement reads is that, so are they responsible for if it's school choice, and if they're school choice students at the moment, school choice families get their children to school, if that's what you're asking. If the district were to redistrict, who would be financially responsible for the children? In that case, it's based on our regional agreement. The Chatham taxpayers are responsible at the moment for about a quarter of the cost, and the Harwich taxpayers are responsible for 3/4 of costs, regardless of where the child goes to school. That's just how our regional agreement plays out. So it's the regional agreement's blind to where the child lives.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. All right, moving into the queue, Kelly King, go ahead.
Okay, hi. Yeah, my name is Kelly King, and I live in South Chatham. And I have a daughter who goes to school at Chatham Elementary at this time. And I just have some concerns about how some of this has all been presented. And it's sort of interesting to me that everyone here that's been speaking so far has been a Chatham resident. Because there's talk of closing the Chatham Elementary School, which everyone who's spoken up has said they're opposed to. I think that there's a lot to be said about having your community school. But that said, because I certainly agree with that, I have some issue with the way that the survey was sent out to people and what was asked, and I'd really like some clarification about what really is on the table, because a few months ago, Dr. Carpenter, you sent out a big, huge report about what our options were. And when you pose those options, you really sort of skewed the statistics to make it look like the only fiscally responsible options were to either have everyone in one school or have everyone in an upper and lower school, because if you didn't do that, it was really unfair to Harwich. And then lo and behold, we have a survey and Harwich says they don't want those two things. Gee, that's surprising. And I really take issue with the report because, redistricting and having upper and lower elementary, in my mind, is, sort of the same from a cost perspective. You still have two buildings with the same amount of students that you have in the district, no matter what. So that said, I really feel like maybe if we had some clarity about what our options are and what the real numbers would be, then we could all make a more educated decision. You know, you just talked about people having their spidey senses if you talked about redistricting, but you know, I think those were already up. People were already worried about what was the impact to me personally, because you put out that report. So I guess I just feel frustrated with how this process is unraveling. And I just wanted to express my opinion about that, because I really think that you skewed it in a certain way that clearly people were going to be surveyed to say, oh, well, this is better. But, you know, it was like if you were in Harwich, you weren't given another option. So that's concerning to me.
Thank you, Kelly. We appreciate your comment. Going into the queue next, Christopher, and I don't see your last name. It starts with M-O. Christopher, go ahead.
Video's not coming up. Can you hear? Oh, hi. I am actually not Christopher. Christopher is my husband. He just owns the account. My name is Ignacio Martinez Murtel. I am a Chatham resident, and we have an incoming kindergartner into Chatham Elementary. We have already registered, so thank you for that. My question is, well, a point that I want to make is that from the numbers that I see, the presentation that Dr. Carpenter put out, I see the problem real as an overpopulation of Harwich Elementary School rather than an underpopulation of the Chatham Elementary. If we're looking at ideal classroom sizes of 18 students, it seems like Chatham Elementary has consistently met those numbers. I don't see how many classrooms per school are ideal. I believe 3, I deduced from the numbers that I saw, would be ideal, which seems like at least could be somewhat met with the school choice students. So my question is, are you looking at this as are Harwich parents' interest that their students are also, that their children are also going to school in classrooms of 18 students, whereas now in Harwich they're overpopulated? Wouldn't we be looking at Chatham Elementary School as a solution rather than a problem?
All right.
I'm sorry, I'm a first-time parent. This is all new to me, so if I'm looking at it simplistically, I apologize.
That's okay, no worries. And tell me again your first name, since I'm still reading Christopher on there.
I'm sorry, I should change that. My first name is Ignacio. It's I-G-N-A-C-I-O. I'll change it on the screen.
Okay, no worries. And Scott, go ahead. You want to respond?
Sure. So Ignacio, good question. The class, we keep the class sizes and use school choice to keep our class sizes as similar as we can between the buildings. So Harwich Elementary has very similar class sizes as Chatham Elementary. Both buildings have class sizes that are in that 18 range. And we have, we've kept them there since the district has come together. At least what I was referring to is, before the district came together, Harwich Elementary had much higher class sizes. We've pulled those down. Chatham Elementary had class sizes that were in that, some of them 11 to 14 students, and we've risen them up to to 17, 18, 19. So in that range, just like so they're very similar between the two schools, and we try with school choice to balance out so that there are very small supportive class sizes across the elementary schools, regardless of where you're at.
I'm sorry if I can just follow up real quick. In your presentation, there was a slide that clearly stated that there's a current problem of classes being too big in Harwich Elementary, and the potential for classes being too small in Chatham Elementary.
So it's not, the slide's referring not to the class size, but to the size of the school. So Chatham Elementary currently has 1 or 2 classrooms per grade level, and Harwich Elementary has 5 classrooms. It used to have 6 classrooms per grade level and has dropped down to now most grade levels are 5. And so and what I was saying is when we came together as a district, Chatham had 3 classrooms per grade level, which I personally think is a very sweet spot for an elementary school. Okay. And Harwich was at 6, and I was arguing that 6 was probably too large. 3 was probably just right. 1 or 2 is probably, per classrooms per grade level is too small. And, so Harwich is currently at 5. And, personally, I think there's a sweet spot between where Chatham currently is and where Harwich currently is. The big question is there an appetite of parents in Harwich and Chatham to do something about it, to find the sweet spot, and how do we get there?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Moving back into the queue, Brett Tolley, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Brett Tolley. Live in Chatham. A parent of a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old. And I was also born and raised in Chatham. I went to Chatham Elementary School and graduated Chatham High School. I want to say thank you to the school committee for putting together this forum. Personally, this is a really meaningful conversation, and I can really appreciate the need to focus on the specifics and the purpose as it was presented of how can we provide the ideal learning environment for our children. But I think especially for Chatham folks, it just speaks to something so much more visceral, because there's the threat of losing our elementary school. And as others pointed out, Jeannie and Megan and Lindsay, about the vital importance of the elementary school to not just our parents and the kids here, but to our entire community. It's really important. It's a really big deal. So yeah, I feel forums like this are just really important. The more feedback, the better. I think no matter how many surveys that we do, there's always more parents and future parents and other stakeholders that need to get involved. So one smaller question that I have, I was just curious about the school committee's plans to potentially have future forums. I think this is great, but I imagine there's others who even want to speak before we get to the 8 o'clock time. So a suggestion actually would be to maybe have a couple more. And then the other question I have too is just thinking about the other Outer Cape towns like Provincetown, Truro, and Wellfleet, who have dealt with similar problems. From what I understand, when those elementary schools got really small, the same arguments came up. There was concern and tension around budget issues and the small class sizes. And so it seems like there's so much wisdom to be gained from approaching the superintendents or other people who have tracked that history to understand where were they, where are they now, how have they experienced small classes and what has the impact been. So I was just curious if the school committee has gathered any of that data. Is that in the works? Is there anyone who's specifically reaching out to some of those neighbors to see how they've dealt with some of these problems? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brett. Scott, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a comment?
I didn't.
Okay.
But Brett, the answer is no. I haven't reached out to other superintendents, although I work very closely with all the superintendents in the Cape and Islands. So at the moment, it's I think we're just looking at are there ways that we can organically within our district go and have Chatham, find a way to have Chatham have more kids in its building, and if the regional agreement status quo, if we don't see any change to Section 5, and we see the town of Chatham's young families and school-age population continue to shrink, I think we'll have to look at and explore things like Gretchen had raised, which are those multi-grade classrooms. So I think we're not at that place yet. We're still, as an Chatham Elementary School, is still significantly bigger than at each grade level than what you're seeing in Provincetown or Truro or Wellfleet. But they're harbingers of what may come, and I think you're right. There are lessons that we can learn from them if we continue to see the demographics tracking in the direction they are. And so it'll be it'll be interesting to see whether or not other things organically change in the town of Chatham in terms of housing stock and affordability for young families that start counteracting some of the trend that we're seeing.
Thank you. And Brett, I'll just answer very quickly on behalf of the school committee that we are continuing to have discussions, and we do intend to have other forums like this, and also about the financial inequity on Harwich's side. So there will be other forums, yes. Thank you. And moving back into the queue, Corey Metters, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Corey Metters, Chatham resident, member of the Chatham Select Board. Grew up in Chatham, went through the whole school system as a child. Moved back here with my wife, and we have our 4 children. Who my oldest, who's now a junior, started in went through the elementary school. We have 2 in the high school, 1 in the middle school, 1 in the elementary school. So we're fully invested in this. My question is actually more for Scott. If it might be important to kind of discuss, where each of our towns are going through a budget review in preparation for our respective town meetings later, this year. And we're talking about amendments to the regional agreement at some point. If Scott could just kind of go through the various steps, because there are various steps in this process. Maybe to put some clarification of what those steps are and a realistic timetable, because we're having these conversations about we might have to do X or Y, but I think it might be important to kind of discuss kind of a timetable, because as we all know, the budget for these town meetings have created some kind of a little bit of a conversation that we're going to be dealing with, which may not necessarily be able to be dealt with at the annual town meetings. More likely in a special town meeting later in the fall. So if you could just kind of put some clarity in the timetables and some realistic clarifications on the steps, I think would be important to anyone watching. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corey, and good question. Scott, go ahead.
Sure. So as Selectman Metters mentioned, there is a parallel conversation that's going on. That's I would say it's concerned about quality education at the elementary level, but it's really on how can we make funding of the elementary schools more equitable to the 2 towns. And the report that people have referenced before, I penned, because you have to keep in mind that I serve both the taxpayers in Chatham and the taxpayers in Harwich. And one thing that has been very clear, if you look back over the last 8 years that I've been here as superintendent, the cost of running Chatham Elementary School per pupil is much higher than Harwich Elementary School, and it is purely a function of size of schools. It's a small school is much more expensive to run than a larger school, which is why when you look at the small schools out in Truro and Wellfleet and Provincetown, those per pupil costs are high. The challenge with our regional agreement is that the Harwich taxpayers are paying at the moment based on what's called foundation enrollment, 75% of the bill to run both of those elementary schools, and the Chatham taxpayers are paying 25% of the bill to run both of those elementary schools. And the thing that I was sharing with both select boards and our school committees is that there might be greater equity if the towns were paying for their own elementary schools, which would actually see fiscal relief happening for Harwich and Chatham picking up some additional costs to run the schools. So those conversations are continuing, and the challenge is it too involves a change to a different section of the regional agreement that deals with how the budget of the school district gets assessed to the 2 towns. And to change that language takes time, and to work things out between the 2 select boards. And we also have a third party that we have to work out the language with, and that's with the Department of Education. So it's not realistic that the two towns are going to come up with an agreed upon language to take forward to town meetings and get it approved by the Department of Education and signed off by the commissioner in time for spring town meetings. But the hope is that if we work collaboratively together and find something that would be mutually beneficial, that we can have language that gets approved by by the commissioner of education and is ready to move forward for a fall town meeting come September, let's say, that would potentially create some fiscal relief for Harwich, and it would, I think, in many ways lessen some fiscal tension with some in Harwich saying, why are we having to pick up a big chunk of the bill for running Chatham Elementary School if both towns are paying for their own elementary schools, is sort of the crux of that conversation and the timeline.
Tina, can I just ask a clarification?
And who is that? I don't know who that is.
I just wanted to ask a clarification, not a question for Scott. Is that in order or no?
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Jeannie. We have two other people in the queue, but I'll go ahead and
Could
follow
you
it.
just
Go ahead.
explain how the money splits up? And we could take that offline too, but are you counting all staff in Harwich versus all staff that oversee Chatham? Are you taking pieces of them? Is that facilities? Is it pensions? Like, how are you slicing those numbers? Because that doesn't sound intuitive.
So yeah, it's the cost. So each building has a budget for it. That is all staff costs. It is the cost to for maintenance of the building, all the staffing, instructional supplies, employee benefits. All of that was sort of built into these numbers that we've discussed with the two towns. So it's really looking at the full cost to run each building soup to nuts.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie, for the question. All right, back into the queue. Michael Westgate, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Michael Westgate in Chatham. I just want to speak up from a community point of view that it's really critical to have Chatham Elementary School as a full service K-5 and preschool operation. There's communities in Maine, island schools, where my wife and I have done some work, where closing the school is a death knell for those communities. And we need to do everything we can to strengthen Chatham's award-winning Chatham Elementary School. We've got the deep learning program going on there. It's really not a concern of the community what the parity is between the numbers of kids or the cost per child in Harwich and Chatham. We care about having a strong school of our own. Now, Chatham's a community under threat. The housing prices have skyrocketed. People are having trouble making ends meet. We really need a healthy and vibrant full service elementary school. I think we need to set a goal of 2 classes per grade. They don't have to all be 18 kids. They can be 13 kids, 15 kids. You can fill them up with school choice kids. Parents have voted with their feet. If you take a look at the number of Harwich parents who send their kids to Chatham versus the number of Chatham parents who send their kids to Harwich. You have kids coming in from other Nauset towns. If you're concerned about the cost per child, there's 2 ways of looking at it. One is the cost and one is the number of children. And my solution would be to say, raise the number of children and you'll bring the cost per child down. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Michael. We appreciate it. Next in the queue is Elaine Gibbs. Elaine, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Chatham, and I am neither a grandparent or a parent of any children in the school. But I think there are 2 issues, obviously. One is the cost disparity, and one is the class size. And I was surprised, because I have been following it, but I hadn't actually seen that slide which showed our cost per pupil versus the rest of the communities in the lower and outer Cape. So Harwich may have a problem that they're technically paying 11,000 per head and we're paying 16, but we are at the bottom of the list in terms of the cost per pupil as we compare to some of the other communities where they're paying 20 and 30,000. So I think it's a little premature for us to decide that we have to redo the contract. I think that Chatham has been a really, really good partner in the district. We regionalized and agreed to do it back in 2010 by only 65 votes. We are going through some tough times here, but I think the priority should be the children and deciding whether or not school size, small school size, is there a good or bad thing? And I think we can decide that by saying what kind of a program and what kind of environment. You know, I have concerns that the school is smaller and it's a really big school physically, you know, if we can make it a more nurturing environment. But so my question is, Scott did say that for FY21, there's going to be 158 children in Chatham. I don't know if he meant that was 158 Chatham children. I don't think so. I think that includes school choice. So if we could know what that number is of Chatham students in the school this year and what that number is going to be projected to be in 2025, because until we can get a handle on that, I don't know how we can move forward and decide, you know, what we need to do. So, you know, is it going to be a precipitous drop or what? I mean, that's what the analysis is about. And I don't know how parents can make a decision until they find out how many children they're going to have their children sitting next to. If it's one, they might have a problem with that. But what can we do to get that number up? So if I could have the FY25 numbers of Chatham students projected. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Scott, go ahead.
Elaine, I don't have that number right at hand, but I'd have to kind of leave this screen to go get to it. But the 158 is this year. The reason I had it in small numbers is that this year is artificially low because of COVID. There's a number of families that are homeschooling so that they're not in our district this year. The question becomes, post-COVID, do they come back into our school system or not? You know, so it's a little, you know, all the projections we were doing were off of last year's numbers going forward up to the point that, you know, that you really can't kind of guess beyond 25 because the kids aren't even born yet. But I would anticipate, I'd anticipate that we're going to continue to see the numbers drop off a little bit more. So that's what the trend has been, and at least, just from what we're seeing in some of the news reports in terms of childbirths with COVID, it's apparently all the quarantining that we've been doing hasn't actually resulted in more kids, is what it was sort of the news report last night.
Thank you, Scott. And we are getting close to top of the hour. Leah, do we have anything else in the chat?
We don't have anything other than a couple of messages I've received that reply to, just in terms of asking clarifying questions if they'd like to, but nothing new, no.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions or comments? I saw a couple of folks get into the queue and then leave the queue. Does anybody have a final? Oh, Terry, are you clapping your hands or do you have a clarifying question?
I'm trying to raise my hand.
Okay, Terry, go ahead.
Just to respond, first of all, thanks, Terry Russell, West Howard, member of the Monomoy School Committee, the regional. Thanks, Tina, for organizing this. I thought it was extremely well set up with a lot of good input. And one of the gentlemen from Chatham alluded to more of this would be good. And I fully agree that a couple more forums, one in the spring and then in the fall, would be well worth getting this input. Secondly, I think it was Elaine Gibbs, I don't know for certain, and I stand corrected, that said, aren't we premature discussing this? And she may very well be right, but I'd rather be premature than all of a sudden coming up real quick to a semi-crisis issue regarding space and kids, and now what do we do? So to me, that's a good thing. The correction, and I stand corrected either by Scott in the homework one, those listings of the Nauset regional system, including the small elementary towns of Wellfleet, Truro, P-Town, etc. I could be mistaken, but as I understood it, they're part of the Nauset regional. Their children go to Nauset Regional High School. However, those small towns, Wellfleet, Truro, P-Town, I believe elected to pay for their own elementary costs. So the graph that Scott showed up, just as a comparison, to say that Chatham Elementary per pupil cost is low on the list, that may be true, but the difference being is paid from the Howardstown, whereas all of the other towns that have been mentioned in the lower Cape, Howard and, I'm sorry, Truro and Wellfleet and P-Town, and we will look this up to make certain I'm correct. The Orleans residents aren't chipping in to the Wellfleet Elementary School. All of the elementary schools being paid for by their respective citizens. So that's the difference that what we find here, that regarding the children's costs, and I think children learning comes first, but the inequity that we've talked about in the other grouping, that's why we're addressing it, to trying to find out, is there a way to make that fair? So, in my last comment, I think I would ask Scott at some point, we will get that finalized comment. So either I'm correct or I'm in error, but that's what I've been functioning on for the past couple of months when I did a little bit of homework on that. So if anyone wants to respond on that, and again, thanks for this evening. I think it was well worth it.
Terry, thank you for your comments. And I see two other people in the queue. I also want to direct, oh, actually, it just came to me. We do have a link to the report that lists projected enrollment through 2025. It's on page 10, and we were hoping to try to share that with everybody in the chat, but it looks like, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, so my crack administrative team was able to get to their computers screens. So so what if we base on how Chatham's enrollment had been tracking as of last year, and again, COVID, Lord only knows what enrollment's going to look like post COVID, but Chatham Elementary is tracking by FY25 to really be about the size of what currently Wellfleet Elementary School is at. Again, but there's some wild cards, and one of them being that Dr. Millen, Chatham Elementary's principal, was saying it looks like in the tea leaves there actually might be a bumper crop of Chatham kindergartners for next year, and it fluctuates. I mean, some years you see a bumper crop, and other years it's pretty lean. So offsetting the bumper crop, we also see in who's signed up for school choice so far. We have actually no children from Harwich that have signed up for school choice at Chatham Elementary School. We've got in kindergarten, we have 4 families from Yarmouth and 1 family from Dennis. So there are some differences out there. And then Elaine, to clarify what's behind the per pupil numbers, Provincetown schools and Truro schools would have the central office costs are built into those numbers. So the numbers that you see for Harwich and Chatham Elementary are the school budget numbers. They're not true per pupil numbers. Just above them is the per pupil number for Monomoy Regional, which would have the central office costs, and the 2 elementary schools are within that number. There are some things that do drive up Provincetown and Truro's costs, and one is that they don't have high schools, and they are stuck negotiating with Nauset for how much Nauset's going to bill them for each child. So kids go to Nauset from there, but they don't go there at $5,000 each. They go there at I think more like 19 plus, and then there's a fee for facilities use on top of that for the kids that they've negotiated with that the Nauset School Committee has negotiated with those towns. Wellfleet's costs has some central office costs built into that number, but it's largely the cost of running the school plus a little central office overlay, as would all the rest of the Nauset regions. But there's also, I think what you see in those numbers is that Monomoy's per pupil costs are very reasonable compared to when you look further out, on the Cape.
Thank you, Scott. And Elaine, hold on one moment. I see you in the queue, and before I call on you, I did manage in the chat to get the link for everyone. It will take you directly to page 10, and it lists projected enrollment through 2025. So before we log out tonight, I just wanted to let everybody know that you could click on that and it'll take you right to that link. Elaine, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say, two previous speakers ago mentioned me. I don't know if he misunderstood what I was saying. I don't think it's premature to make decisions about the school. I think it's premature to redo our district agreement. Scott just verified that our school, per pupil costs are lower than most of the Cape. Until we find out what the problem is and where we're going, it seems to me that that's premature. So if we don't, I thought I had seen where we were going to have 58 students in 2025, but if that's not the case, we need to do a lot more research as to what we think is going to happen. And, there are going to be downturns for each community. And I don't think you just go and redo a district agreement that we have agreed to until we find out what the cause is and what potential solutions are. And it sounds like we don't know that yet. So we've got to get some more good data on what's going to happen. How many are out because of COVID? How many are coming back next year? So that we can get a better determination of what class size is, because that's what this is all about. And again, apparently we don't know as much as I thought we did from prior reports. It sounds like it's a lot more iffy. So before we start moving kids around and closing schools, I think we've got to get some better data. And I don't think we should redo the agreement right now. I think we should wait to see what this is going to cost and what the plan is. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, we are a little over the hour now. Any final comments, clarifications from anyone? And Leah, let me know if there's anything in the chat. I do not see any hands up, so this is the last call before we close for the evening. And Elaine, I'm just going to take your hand down. It looks like Brett, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, quick thought for maybe a future forum. I realized that the purpose of the forum stated in the beginning was how do we provide an ideal learning environment for the Monomoy elementary children. Makes a lot of sense, but I also recognize this overlap with the problem of the budget, the inequity is really dominant, right? And I feel like separating out those discussions is important. If we really ask ourselves the question, is class size too small? Is that a problem in Chatham? The survey that the Monomoy School District put out didn't even address that. Like, we don't have that data. I feel like honing in more deeply around that question is really important. I think the forum set out to do that, but it's so easy to get pulled into the question around the budget and equity. So just a thought moving forward is, how can we collectively really deepen our understanding around whether or not it's a problem. I think parents are a big part of that. Research is a part of it. Other school systems on the Lower Cape can be part of that. But I just my hope is that we don't get so pulled into the budget inequities that we lose track of really understanding, is class size a problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you very much for that comment. Any other, Bree, go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Bree Schreiner. I live at 125 Oak Hill Road in Chatham. I thought I just wanted to echo what Brett was saying and kind of end that meeting on the note that I do feel very strongly as a Chatham parent. I have an upcoming kindergartner in 2 years and a current kindergartner who's in that small one classroom school, if you will, the one class grade. That I think if you surveyed the parents in Chatham and asked them, do they think class size is too small? And do they think the Chatham school is too small? What do we really feel? I think the vast majority of us feel pretty strongly that we like the small school and we like that our kids are in small classes and we like those close, intimate relationships between the students and between the teachers and the students. And I think that kind of survey that Brett was just alluding to would be very helpful. And so thank you very much to all of you for holding this forum. And thank you, Dr. Carpenter. And thank you, Dr. Millen, too, for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments, Bree. I appreciate that. And that's seems to be a nice way to close us out. I see no other hands raised and it is 8:11. So I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who has joined us this evening. We appreciate your comments, your questions, your interest in this scenario. And thank you very much for being here. Because we are in a quorum this evening with the school committee, I will need to call us to a close. We're going to do a final adjournment. So I am going to just run around the room and school committee members, if I could have a motion to adjourn the public forum, please.
So moved.
All right, sounded
Second.
like Sharon and Nancy has seconded. So I'm going to go around the room. All in favor of adjourning the community forum, just say aye. So we'll start with Nancy.
Aye.
Thank you. Jackie?
Aye.
Thank you. Terry? And you'll have to come off mute, Terry.
Aye.
Thank you. Joanne?
Aye.
Thank you. Joe?
Joe Osceola, aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Stout, aye.
Thank you. Meredith?
Meredith Henderson, aye.
Thank you. And Tina Gaines is an aye. So we are officially adjourned at 8:13.